Okay, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
You've probably heard the whispers, maybe seen the headlines. The deep web, the dark web, it conjures up these images of like shadows, illicit marketplaces, stuff you really don't want to click on, right?
Definitely. There's a lot of mystery there, maybe even fear. And it's often fueled by stories that really blur the lines between what's real and what's,
Yeah.
well, nightmare fuel.
Right. And that fascination, that kind of fear, it often hides what's actually going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You sent us a whole stack of sources that really get to the heart of it. They peel back the layers on the tech that makes the anonymity possible. The very real criminal side of things, and even like the cultural side. Why are we so drawn to the scary stories about this whole space?
So think of this as your shortcut. Yeah. Cutting through all that noise. Our mission today is a deep dive into your material to really understand what these parts of the internet actually are, how the hidden bits function, and maybe most importantly, distinguish the legitimate uses and the exaggerated fears from the actual tangible threats, things that might really impact you.
And what we found in these sources, it's genuinely surprising in places.
It really is.
From just how big and kind of boring the top web is,
Right.
to the tiny, but well, yeah, shadowy dark web, the reality is just way more nuanced than the big, scary stories make it seem.
Okay, let's start right there then, because I think the biggest misconception is the one that creates the most panic.
Which one's that?
That deep web just equals criminal underworld. But your sources are crystal clear. That's completely wrong.
Fundamentally wrong, yeah. Think of the internet, like in layers. The surface web, that's just the top bit. It's what search engines like Google can actually find.
So the stuff I browse every day without logging in.
Exactly. News sites, public websites, blogs, that kind of thing. But here's the kicker. It's estimated to be only maybe 5 to 10% of the entire internet.
Wait, 5 to 10%? Seriously? So the other 95%, that's the deep web.
That's it. The deep web is the vast, vast majority.
Wow.
But, and this is key, it's not hidden because it's like nefarious or bad.
Yeah.
It's hidden because you need some kind of authentication or specific access.
Okay. Like what?
Well, your online banking portal, right?
Yeah.
Your email inbox, subscription content behind paywalls, private company databases, your cloud storage files. You need to log in. You need permission.
Gotcha. So my private email isn't indexed by Google for obvious reasons. It's about privacy.
Precisely. It's built for privacy and confidentiality, not, anonymity from the police or anything like that for most users.
Right.
The deep web is overwhelmingly legitimate stuff. It's just private. And misunderstanding just how huge it is.
Right.
That's what feeds the unnecessary panic, this idea that 90% of the internet is like a digital back alley.
Okay. That makes sense. Deep web is mostly private, normal stuff. So where does the actual shadowy part fit in? The bit people are actually scared of?
Right. That's the dark web. And it's a tiny, tiny fraction within the deep web, like maybe less than 0.01% of the whole internet. It's minuscule.
Less than 0.01%.
Right. And the key difference here is that it is designed specifically for anonymity. You need special software to even get there, most famously Tor.
Tor. The onion router. Yeah, you always hear that name connected to the dark web.
Exactly. And its anonymity makes it this really fascinating, potent tool. I mean, it's genuinely vital for journalists and activists in, oppressive countries who need to communicate safely.
So there's a legitimate, important use case.
Absolutely. But yes, it's also where that concentrated illegal activity we hear about tends to happen. Drugs, weapons, data.
Right.
So the critical takeaway here is deep web is huge, but mostly innocent private stuff. The real criminal concentration, that's in the minuscule dark web.
That distinction feels super important for just like cutting through the hype and the fear.
It really is.
Okay, so let's talk about Tor. How does this technology actually work? How does it provide that anonymity?
Okay, so the core idea is something called the onion routing protocol, hence the name, Tor.
Yeah, onion.
Layers. Exactly like an onion. Think of your internet request, right? Your data gets wrapped in multiple layers of encryption. When you use Tor, your connection doesn't go straight to the website. It gets bounced through a series of volunteer-run computers around the world, usually 3 of them.
Like a digital hot potato bouncing around?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Each computer or node in that path only decrypts one layer of the onion. And that layer only tells it the address of the next node to send the data to. It doesn't know where it originally came from or where it's ultimately going.
Ah, okay. So no single point knows the whole journey.
Precisely. The entry node, the first one. It knows your IP address, where you are basically, but it doesn't know the final website you're trying to reach. The middle node. It knows nothing about the start or the end. It just passes data between the first and third node.
Total blind spot.
Right. And the exit node, the last one, it knows the destination website you're visiting, but it only knows the traffic came from the middle node, not from you.
So it's that layering and the bouncing that breaks the connection, hides your identity.
Exactly. It's designed to make tracing the origin incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Though, there is a potential weak spot people talk about.
Oh, yeah.
That exit node. If the final connection from the exit node to the website you're visiting isn't encrypted itself, like if it's an old-style HTTP site, not HTTPS,
Right.
then the person running that exit node could potentially see the unencrypted traffic passing through at that final step.
Okay, that's a key detail. Good to know. And what about those weird .onion web addresses you hear about?
Ah, right. Those are hidden services, or sometimes called onion sites.
Hidden services.
Yeah, these websites aren't just accessed through Tor. They're actually hosted within the Tor network itself.
Oh, okay, so the server itself is hidden too.
Completely. The technology hides the physical location and the real IP address of the server hosting the site.
So wait, both the person visiting the site and the site itself are anonymous to each other and to the outside world.
That's the goal, yes. And that's why taking down these illegal onion sites is such a challenge for law enforcement.
Because you can't easily find the server.
It's extremely difficult.
Right.
So often, investigations focus on finding the people running the site through maybe mistakes they make, operational security errors, or other investigative techniques, rather than just trying to pinpoint the server hardware itself.
It really is a game of technological hide and seek.
It is.
Now, okay, this whole anonymous system,
Yeah?
people need to buy and sell things, right?
Yeah.
Your sources really hammered home that cryptocurrency is essential.
Oh, absolutely. It's the lifeblood.
Right.
You know, without a way to pay anonymously, or at least pseudo-anonymously, the whole dark market structure kind of falls apart.
Right.
And the way currencies have been used there. It's evolved.
Yeah.
It's a direct response to law enforcement getting better at tracking money.
So Bitcoin was the big one at first, right? Like the currency of Silk Road.
Yeah, Bitcoin BTC was definitely the default for those early darknet markets, Silk Road being the most famous example. But here's a really critical point your sources make. Bitcoin isn't truly anonymous. It's pseudonymous.
Pseudonymous. Okay, what does that actually mean? Like, practically?
It means your real name isn't directly attached to the transaction itself, but every single Bitcoin transaction is publicly recorded forever on the blockchain.
Okay.
So if investigators can somehow link a specific Bitcoin wallet address back to your real identity, maybe through a crypto exchange where you had to show ID, KYC rules.
Right, know your customer.
Or maybe if you weren't careful about how you spent the Bitcoin later, then potentially your entire transaction history associated with that wallet can be traced.
Ah, so the trail is still there on the public ledger. It just needs that starting link back to you.
Exactly. And law enforcement agencies got much better at doing that kind of blockchain analysis over time.
And the criminals noticed.
They definitely noticed. And they adapted.
Moving to other cryptocurrencies. Things like Monero. I think I saw that mentioned.
Yeah, precisely. Monero, XMR, is a prime example of what they call a privacy coin. It's designed from the ground up to obscure transaction details by default. Much, much harder to trace than Bitcoin.
Okay, what's the tech difference that makes it harder to trace?
Well, it uses a few clever cryptographic techniques. Things like ring signatures, which basically mix your transaction in with a bunch of others, so it's hard to tell who the actual sender was within that group.
Okay, hides the sender.
And then there are stealth addresses. These create unique, one-time addresses for every single transaction, hiding the receiver's real address.
Hides the receiver and the amount.
Yep. That's hidden too using something called ring CT, ring confidential transactions. It masks the amount being sent.
Wow. So it obscures sender, receiver, and amount right on the blockchain by default. That sounds like a direct technological countermove to Bitcoin tracing efforts.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it just highlights that this whole space is a continuous technological arms race, Between those seeking anonymity for whatever reason and those trying to break that anonymity, often law enforcement.
Fascinating how the tech just keeps evolving like that in response. Okay, enough of the deep tech dive for a minute. Let's talk about the actual crime. Because your sources give some pretty stark examples. Silk Road is the classic one, right?
It really set the template, yeah. Silk Road, launched back in, 2011? It was the first really big, infamous darknet market, famously called the Amazon of drugs.
The Amazon of drugs, yeah.
And its success, interestingly, came from mimicking legitimate e-commerce sites. It had user profiles, seller ratings, customer reviews.
Like eBay for illegal stuff?
Kind of. And crucially, it had an escrow system. The platform would hold the buyer's Bitcoin until they confirm they actually received the goods.
That escrow system on a drug market. That's it's a twisted kind of business innovation, I guess.
It built trust in a completely trustless, anonymous environment. And yeah, it relied entirely on Tor for access and Bitcoin for payments back then.
And the guy behind it all was known as Dread Pirate Roberts.
That was his online handle, yeah. His real name was Ross Ulbricht.
Okay. And how did they catch him? Was it some amazing hack?
This is where it gets really interesting and kind of mundane in a way. His downfall wasn't about the FBI cracking Tor or breaking Bitcoin. Nope. It was a simple, fundamental operational security error. OPSEC.
OPSEC. What did he do?
Well, very early on, apparently before Silk Road was huge, he used his real email address on a public internet forum.
No.
Asking for programming help. And he mentioned a hidden service project he was working on that sounded suspiciously like, well, Silk Road.
Are you serious? A single slip-up like that, using his real email, brought down this massive operation.
It seems so. It was like a tiny thread investigators found and just kept pulling until the whole thing unraveled. It's a stark warning about your digital footprint, right? Even from years ago.
Absolutely. Wow. And his arrest was pretty dramatic too, wasn't it?
Yeah, they didn't just knock on his door. The FBI agents apparently staged a distraction, like faked a fight or something, in a public library where he was working. So they could physically grab his open laptop while he was logged in as the Silk Road administrator, before he could close it or trigger encryption. They needed that live access.
Whoa. Smart tactic. Bypassed the encryption entirely. What was the scale of Silk Road? How big was it?
Just immense for its time. Sources estimate over $1.2 billion in total sales went through the site.
Billion.
Yeah. With Ulbricht himself apparently taking around $80 million in commission.
80 million.
And the FBI seized a huge amount of Bitcoin from him, and the site over 144,000 Bitcoin.
144,000 Bitcoin seized back in 2013. Okay, I have to ask. Knowing how crypto prices went nuts, what was that stash worth later on?
Well, your source mentions that even by late 2017, that specific pile of Bitcoin was already valued around $1.9 billion.
Billion, with a B.
Today, could be significantly higher, depending on market swings, obviously. But yeah, a staggering amount of value locked up from that one case.
And Ulbricht's sentence caused a lot of controversy too, didn't it?
It really did. He received a double life sentence plus 40 years with no possibility of parole.
Wow.
His supporters argued that was way too harsh for a nonviolent founder, essentially, which kicked off the whole Free Ross movement you might have heard about.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, the prosecution did bring forward allegations that he'd attempted to arrange murders for hire against people threatening the site.
Right.
Those weren't proven to have actually happened, but the allegations were considered during sentencing. And then adding another layer of just messiness to the whole thing.
What else?
2 of the federal agents investigating Silk Road were later convicted themselves for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin during the investigation, using their access and positions.
You're kidding? Corrupt agents investigating the dark web kingpin.
Yep. So you had the alleged mastermind, serious violence allegations, and corrupt investigators. Just an absolute saga.
Unbelievable. And didn't something happen with him more recently?
That's right, yeah. In a late development, President Trump actually pardoned Ross Ulbricht in 2025.
Wow, okay. So, Silk Road is the big international story, but bringing it a bit closer to home for many of our listeners, your sources also detailed quite a bit of dark web activity and real consequences in places like Taiwan. This isn't just something happening over there.
Absolutely not. The incognito market case is a really stark local example.
Yeah.
You had this 24-year-old allegedly operating under the name Pharaoh, accused of running a major darknet drug market. It apparently processed something like $100 million in transactions over 3 years.
100 million, run by a 24-year-old.
Allegedly, yeah. And again, like Silk Road, it was apparently run like a pretty sophisticated e-commerce platform. It just goes to show the technical skill to build these things can pop up anywhere.
Yeah. And then there are the data breaches. This is where the dark web shifts from being this abstract concept to something that could be a direct personal threat for you, the listener.
It's exactly right. This is where it hits home. Your sources highlight several massive data breaches affecting Taiwan, where the data ended up for sale on the dark web. The Taiwan household registration data leak is particularly chilling.
What happened there?
Personal information for potentially 23 million people. Basically, the whole country was reportedly offered up for sale on some overseas forum. And the price, Just $5,000 US.
Wait, the detailed personal data for almost an entire country's population going for $5,000. That's terrifyingly cheap.
It really puts into perspective how little our sensitive data is sometimes valued on these black markets. And the initial government denial that the breach even happened didn't exactly help public trust either.
I can imagine. What else?
Well, there were others mentioned. Over 1 million customer records from China Airlines apparently used for blackmail attempts. Customer data from the iRate car sharing service was found exposed online. SLI bookstore member data was reportedly stolen and used for targeted phone scams.
So it's your name, your address, maybe your travel history, your purchase history, all potentially bundled up in these massive databases being bought and sold for pennies on the dark web.
It's a very real possibility for anyone who's ever interacted online, sadly. And beyond just selling data and drugs, the sources mention the dark web is also used to plan or coordinate more traditional crimes, sometimes like kidnappings or making threats in some documented cases.
Okay, so it sounds like the criminal side of the dark web isn't just static. It's becoming, I don't know, more professional. Your source used the term crime as a service. What's that about?
Yeah, it's definitely evolving. It's becoming much more structured, almost like an industry. Crime as a service, CAPTA, basically means that instead of one person doing everything, criminal activities are offered as specialized services you can rent or buy.
Like outsourcing crime.
Pretty much. It dramatically lowers the technical barrier for entry into cybercrime. You don't need to be a master hacker anymore.
Okay, give me some examples. What kind of services are we talking about?
Ransomware as a service. Rattlelist is probably the biggest one right now.
RAS.
Yeah. You have developers who create the malicious ransomware code and the infrastructure to manage it. Then they lease it out to other criminals, called affiliates. The affiliates are the ones who actually carry out the attacks, get into networks, deploy the ransomware. Then, if they get a ransom payment, they split the money with the Redis developers.
So it's like a franchise model for extortion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this model is a huge driver behind the explosion of ransomware attacks we've seen globally. Another key example is initial access brokers, IABs.
Initial access brokers.
Yeah. These are criminals who specialize purely in getting into company networks. They might use phishing, exploit software vulnerabilities, buy stolen passwords, whatever works.
Okay, so they break in. Then what?
Then they sell that access, that foothold, inside the network on the dark web to other criminal groups, like maybe to a RAS affiliate, who then uses that access to deploy their ransomware.
Wow. So one group focuses on picking the lock, and another group comes in later to actually rob the place. It's like digital contract work for criminals.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really fascinating, and maybe a bit disturbing, is how similar this KS model is to legitimate business models, like software as a service, SaaS.
Right. Like paying for a subscription to Salesforce, but for crime.
Kind of, yeah. It just shows the dark web economy isn't just chaos. It's often rational, efficient, and very profit-driven, borrowing ideas from successful, legitimate businesses.
Okay. Wow. We've covered the tech, the real crime, the way that crime is evolving. Now let's pivot to the part that probably captures the public imagination the most, maybe even more than the reality.
The myths.
The myths, the urban legends, the just sheer fear factor surrounding the dark web.
The dark web is the modern-day boogeyman, yeah.
Yeah.
It's become the setting for just countless online horror stories, urban legends.
Like a creepypasta type stuff? Is that where it comes from?
A lot of it fits that mold, definitely. The themes you see in online horror, especially when it taps into the dark web, they often involve really extreme, sometimes interactive violence, or just unspeakable acts. Things like dark web feederism, or stories about buying people for torture. The fundamental terror in those stories is often that you could just accidentally stumble into unimaginable real-world danger just by clicking the wrong link.
That one wrong click leads to horror.
Exactly. And there are even whole podcasts dedicated to this kind of stuff, right? Like the dark web vlogs that one of your sources flagged.
Yeah, tell me about that one.
It's a perfect example of how that line between reality and fiction just gets completely obliterated. The show claims to be based on real cases from a supposed former CIA agent, but the plots are just wildly, wildly unbelievable.
Okay, give me some highlights. How absurd are we talking?
Oh, they're magnificent in their absurdity. You've got stories about CERN scientists using the dark web to deliberately enter black holes.
Wait, what?
To find parallel universes. Or the Vatican having a secret telescope, only accessible via dark web links apparently, to watch angels and demons fighting it out.
Right. Because CERN is definitely focused on occult interdimensional travel, not particle physics.
Naturally.
And the Vatican Observatory is secretly tracking celestial battles, not, doing actual astronomy.
And maybe my favorite, being able to purchase the bodies of dead celebrities on the dark web for taxidermy.
Okay, that's just pure fiction. Nobody actually believes that stuff, right?
Well, the creator himself admits the stories are 100,000% unbelievable. So the big question your sources raise is, what does this all mean? Why are we so drawn to these often completely preposterous but still terrifying stories about the dark web?
Yeah, why the deep fascination with this specific flavor of digital horror?
Well, a big part of it seems to be what sociologists call moral panic.
Moral panic.
Yeah. The dark web becomes this powerful symbol for all sorts of modern anxieties. Worries about technology we don't fully understand, globalization, anonymity gone wrong, the feeling of losing control or privacy online.
So it's like a scapegoat for broader fears.
Exactly. It becomes a concrete demon onto which we can project these more abstract fears about the complexities of the modern world. It gives a face to the unsettling parts of living so much of our lives online.
And maybe engaging with the stories, even the fake ones, helps process those fears somehow.
That's another part of it, yeah. It offers a kind of catharsis. You can confront these scary ideas in a relatively safe, contained way through a story, through a podcast.
But the stories aren't conjured out of thin air, right? They have to draw on something real, even if they exaggerate it wildly.
That's absolutely true. The myths are often a heavily distorted reflection of reality. They tap into the fact that, yes, illegal markets do exist on the dark web, data leaks do happen, hacking tools are traded there.
So it takes a kernel of truth and blows it up into a monster.
Precisely. It's a form of what some call techno-paranoia. Our very modern fears projected onto our very modern technology.
So for you, the listener, this really hammers home the importance of, well, critical media literacy, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial. Being able to step back, evaluate sources, and distinguish between, verifiable facts about real security threats and sensationalized fictional horror stories. That's key.
It's how you avoid unnecessary panic and actually understand where the real risks might lie for you personally.
Exactly.
Okay, so bringing this all together then, we've sort of navigated the layers, right, from the everyday, mostly boring deep web to the small, hidden, and sometimes dangerous dark web. We've looked at the anonymity tech, the sophisticated criminal economies it enables, and these powerful, often fictional stories we tell ourselves about it all.
And I think we've seen that while there are definitely real serious threats, particularly around sophisticated cybercrime like ransomware and that terrifyingly cheap trade in stolen personal data, the dark web itself is often massively misunderstood. Its dangers get amplified by sensationalism and these urban legends.
So the real power for you, our listener, isn't really in fearing this abstract digital boogeyman.
No.
It's more in understanding the facts, practicing smart digital habits yourself, and just applying that critical thinking to the information landscape you navigate every single day.
Couldn't agree more. Which leads to a kind of final thought, maybe.
Yeah.
In this world where technology gives us both, incredible connection and unprecedented ways to hide, how do we actually balance that? How do we balance the fundamental need or maybe desire for digital privacy and anonymity with the equally critical need for safety and security for society as a whole?
Is perfect digital privacy even compatible with achieving collective digital security? Can they coexist?
Is it inherently incompatible?
Yeah.
That's something to ponder, I think.
Definitely something to think about as you go about your online life after hearing all this.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We'll see you in the next one.